Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com. So we have a guest with us. Craig Pasta is the co-host of the Convo Couch, an independent talk show discussing and analyzing the daily news cycle and featuring up-and-coming grassroots personalities. He also has a new show called Pasta to Go, where he dives into the world of food and culture around the globe. Please welcome back to the show our pal Craig Pasta Jardula. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Doing good, Jimmy. How about yourself?
Good. Where are you right now?
I'm actually just flew into Florida last night. I'm attending a event this weekend with Kim Iverson, and then I'm off to Nicaragua and then to Venezuela to observe that election.
So now the reason why we have Craig on for this story, because this story is about election integrity. So they passed this new bill in the Senate. In the House. It's called the SAVE Act. Their Speaker, Mike Johnson, he says the SAVE Act will safeguard our elections by ensuring only American citizens vote in federal elections. And I just say, why is Mike Johnson such a complete racist and a homophobe and an anti-Semite? And I know I have the rest of the list somewhere, but he's all those things. If you're asking for, so here's what he says it'll do. He says this act will require state election officials to ask about citizenship before providing voter registration forms. Boy, that seems very racist. Requires an individual to provide proof of citizenship in order to register to vote in federal elections. It allows state officials to accept a wide variety of documents that will make it easy for citizens to register to vote in federal elections. Also, it provides states with access to federal agency databases so they can remove non-citizens from voter rolls and confirm citizenship for individuals lacking proof of citizenship. Wow. How dare you demand someone tell you where they are from when they're entering the country? That's what I say. The last thing you want to do now is come up with a reason for them not to become soldiers. Am I right? He's a little bit more. He goes, direct the Department of Homeland Security to determine whether to conduct removal proceedings if a non-citizen has been identified as having registered to vote in federal elections. Require DHS to notify a state chief election official whenever an individual has been naturalized to ensure our newest citizens are able to exercise their right to vote. Wow. And then give them a credit card and free medical. That's the guy you're going to vote for, right? So, by the way, Elon Musk says those who oppose this are, in all caps, traitors. And then he says, what's the penalty for traitors again? I don't think that's good. I think that's stochastic violence. So, Craig, the reason why I have you on is because you're an election integrity specialist, and you found out most other countries ask you to. Well, aren't people in fact think it's crazy that they don't demand an ID? Is that correct?
Yeah, when I was in Nicaragua, there was one of our tour guides asked me several times. They really don't let you vote in the United States without an ID, because in Nicaragua you had to have an ID to vote. And I kept telling him, yeah, you don't need ID to vote in Los Angeles. You can vote without ID. And he said, why don't they just make it easier to get an ID? If that's the complaint from the Democrats, saying that a lot of people can't get access to get an ID. He was just dumbfounded. And whether I was in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Honduras,
Nicaragua,
Nicaragua, you need an ID to vote. And that's just plain and simple.
So, and those people in Central or Latin and South America, I don't know where Latin America is. I know we're Central and South, but I know according to Dan Quayle, they do. He was glad he paid attention in Latin class, and he also was. When he goes to the Arctic, he hopes he can speak articulately. Anyway, that's an old Rich what you call it joke. I'm blanking on his last name. So they think it's crazy that we don't have, and I also think, now this is going to sound maybe crazy to some people, I think it's a bit racist to not demand voter ID because people say, well, I'm going to show you what people say in a minute. But you're assuming black people are so feeble that they can't get an ID. You can't. First of all, you can't rent a car without an ID. You can't rent a hotel room without an ID. You can't ride on an airline flight. You can't make an airline without an ID. There's almost nothing you can do. You can't get a credit card without an ID. You can't buy cigarettes or alcohol without an ID. There's nothing you can't do. You have to have an ID for that, except vote. Except vote. And to say that black people are somehow so feeble that they can't get an ID. I flipped on this until I talked to you, Craig. I used to be, because they say it'll disenfranchise certain amounts of black people. And then you're like, yeah, but and then I'm like, yeah, it is crazy. Here's what people said about this. So this guy says, if you did what you said you were going to do, we'd have closed the borders and have less of a need for the SAVE Act. 5,000 illegal aliens crossed the border today. So far, you lack a spine. But here's the even more interesting point. Paul S. Shapula says, the Senate is never going to prove this. You failed, Speaker Johnson. Your only leverage was funding. And you gave Joe Biden a blank check. Shame on you. You're part of the problem. So he's saying the House and the Speaker of the House has the power of the purse, and that's what you could have used as leverage to make sure the Senate passed this, and he didn't. So he knew that the Senate wasn't gonna pass it, and guess what? The Democrats just blocked the SAVE Act.
Yeah.
So is there any legitimate reason, Craig, for them to be against the SAVE Act?
I don't know if there's any legitimate reason to be against it other than to fundraise and continue to call your opposition racist, right? It makes them, they're allowed to stick to the script that way. So I don't know why they would necessarily, vote against it. But I do want to make one important point here, Jimmy, and I have a lot of points written down to talk about when it comes to the SAVE Act. It won't fix the problem, because immigrants really don't vote in mass in national elections. They just don't. They hide in the shadows. They don't commit as much crime as American citizens. That's just the cold hard fact.
Right.
But what this is really doing, Jimmy, and I think people, need to, when they look into this, it's not so much about stopping immigrants from voting. It's stopping the establishment from exploiting an immigrant's ballot that's automatically given to them, right? So in Nevada, for instance, when you go to obtain a driver's license or re-register for your driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. And not only are you automatically registered to vote, you get a mail-in ballot a month before the election. And in Nevada, they have vote centers, ballot harvesting, and drop boxes. So it's not so much, that they're going to stop immigrants from voting. They're going to stop the mechanism in which immigrants are exploited for their ballots, because you don't need voters to fraudulently swing an election. You just need ballots. And in today's age, with drop boxes and ballot harvesting legal in 27 states, it's easy to swing an election when you have mass mail-out balloting. And in states like Nevada and California and in New York, we lived in California for many years. They allow undocumented workers to get a license. They want them to do that. So therefore, if they automatically register them, they get a ballot. It's where does that ballot end up and whose hands, and then who has the ability to use it. So it's stopping the mechanism of exploiting the ballots of immigrants that come across the border.
Tell people what ballot harvesting is, please.
Ballot harvesting means that you or I or anybody else can hand in someone's ballot. In other words, I can take as many ballots as I want and put them in a drop box. I can grab my Aunt Betsy's ballot, my uncle's ballot, my mother's ballot, my
your
father's
neighbor's ballot.
Any ballots, right? So if there's loose ballots floating around, the way that you fraudulently swing an election is you get as many ballots out there as possible with no chain of custody. We have no chain of custody and a ton of ballots floating out everywhere because there's shotguns all over the place. So if I can take in 25 different ballots and I bought a bunch of ballots from somebody who went around and collected a bunch of ballots that were in the trash, or, you know, when they try to return to sender and all those things, then I can sway an election because I have all these ballots. And if I can generate illegal immigrants' ballots or undocumented workers, then I can sway in a whole election because there's so many ballots out there.
I did see you saw the videos of the people doing the ballot harvesting. I saw, well, with Tim Canova's election, we saw them. There's no chain of custody. People are showing up with ballot boxes full of ballots in their trunk, putting it into a U-Haul. So, you know, before 2020, the Democrats used to scream about the lack of integrity in our voting system and our election systems. They don't do it anymore, right? But so I just want to show you. Here's a. I just got to jump to this part. Here's a black representative, and here's what he has to say about the SAVE Act.
Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 8281, the SAVE Act. For years, Democrats have called Republicans conspiracy theorists for stating Democrats want illegal aliens to vote in our elections, yet President Biden and every single Democrat in Washington want this bill to fail. If Biden and the Democrats want to clear up this conspiracy theory, Mr. President, when this bill passes, make sure you sign it into law. And on another note, I've been black for my entire life.
Really?
I'd like to bring up the most racist thing I've ever heard is the insinuation by Democrats that black and brown Americans are too stupid to get an ID to vote, just like everybody else. I call this the soft bigotry of low expectations. Figuring out how to vote in this country is a very low bar, and we could all figure it out regardless of your race, religion, color, or creed, and we should all want free and fair elections. With me today, I'm not going to pull mine out this time, but I have 6 forms of government issue ID. How did I acquire that? Personal responsibility in this country. I've also heard a lot about Jim Crow here today. I'm here to tell you Jim Crow is over, and I know it because my parents grew up in it. And I think it's actually insulting to those that actually experienced the ills of Jim Crow. Having an ID to vote in our nation's elections should be a requirement, which is why I stand before you today urging my colleagues on the left to support this bill. If you want secure elections, if you want your vote to count, vote for the SAVE Act. And you'll back the rest of my.
So this isn't as. So that's a black guy saying that it's actually racist and insulting to say that black people could, because that's what they always say. And I want to show you some video of the people saying that. Let's watch this.
This bill is essentially a poll tax because I am not aware of a single proof of citizenship document that does not cost an individual money to get it, unless we are requiring every state to provide one for free, and then it's an unfunded mandate.
Hey, why don't you just have people show their vaccine passport? You gave those for people for free. Why not that? Somehow I had to have a vaccine passport to buy a burrito. I had to have a vaccine passport to go have lunch. But to have an ID to vote is somehow a bridge too far for these motherfuckers.
Hey, Jimmy.
Yeah.
But by the way, one of the most interesting things that I found out in the 7 Latin American countries I went to observe elections, the grassroots wants IDs. In fact, they want more identifications for the individuals because they understand, and they're way more educated on their elections than we are, the citizens. They understand the easiest way for the ruling class to steal an election is to create more votes. If you don't have ID laws, then you can create more ballots and more votes that way. It's less trackable. You know, you can just, there's ways to steal an election if in fact IDs aren't brought about. So when you go to these other countries, it's the poor grassroots that are actually demanding that you have ID. In Colombia, they wanted like the verification, like the electronic thumbprint verification. They wanted that there because they understand if you don't have these voter ID laws and you don't present an ID, the ruling class can then create votes and steal an election. That's the crazy part about what we're talking about.
Here's some more from that same session of Congress.
hypotheticals. It is under attack right now, right here with this very bill. Republicans want to throw up barriers because when people vote, they lose. Let me be clear. They don't want you to vote. They don't want to hear Black voices, brown voices, LGBTQIA voices, young voices. Our fundamental access to our democracy is being politicized. And this xenophobic attack that we're debating.
So you're telling me gay people also can't get IDs? Not gay people, young people? Every young person I know has a driver's license. Every young person I know has to get an ID to go when they go to college. Every person young. But so it's not just black people. So black people somehow can't figure it out. This is unbelievably insulting.
Yeah.
If she says comedians, I'd be like, fuck you. I know how to get an ID. Here we go.
They will make it harder for Americans to vote. My Republican colleagues will claim that requiring IDs is a small ask, but nearly 30 million people lack a valid driver's license, and about 15 to 18 million adults don't have access to documents proving their birth or citizenship.
So how did they get their vaccine passports? That's my question. How were you able to verify them when they got their vaccine? Somehow you did it. You were for that? I know she was for that. You know she was for that. How were you able to verify them for their vaccines? So what do you say to that when she says 30 million Americans lack a driver's license? Maybe are those 30 million people who just is she counting children who aren't
That's
old?
what I think she's doing, Jimmy.
I think she's counting children who and people who like live in New York City who don't want to get a driver's license because they don't drive. She must be counting, and then she says 15 million Americans who lack the documentation to get a. How do they know that? How do they? It reminds me of an old joke. Four out of 5 people who suffer from diabetes don't know it. Well, really, if they don't know, how do you? And if you know it, why don't you tell them? So how does this? How do they know that 15 million Americans? First of all, that's about as many people as they let in undocumented on a monthly basis in the United States. I'm exaggerating, but how do you think they know that 15 million Americans don't have a birth certificate? Is that what she's saying? It's
just an exploitation of poor people, which he's just trying to use. I mean, this is a tactic they've been using for quite some time, Jimmy, because a lot of Democratic voters, unfortunately, they think with their feelings and not their brains, and they don't do the homework there. And if you want to fix this problem, the 2 things that they talk about, number 1, they can't get an ID. Make it easier for them to get an ID. I keep screaming this because that's what it should be. And like you said, they made it easy for everybody to get a vaccine passport. Well, make it easy for everybody to get an ID. And if it's a financial thing, hey, it's a poll tax. Why don't you give us a working economy where we don't have to worry about the finances to go get an ID if you really want to fix this problem?
But they love to call you a xenophobe. They love to call. Here we go. Watch this.
For Republicans is for them to lay the groundwork to undermine the outcome of the presidential election, just as they did 4 years ago, just as they will again and again, until they realize either the futility of this exercise or the republic crumbles. I pray for the former.
He's going to say, if you demand a voter ID, the republic will crumble. Did you hear? That's what he said.
Yeah.
So it's the exact opposite, right? So according to you, an election integrity expert, it's the exact opposite. That if you don't have some kind of controls on who gets ballots and a chain of custody, that's how you rig elections.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say, like, every election that I see and what we need over here has to be transparent, a strict chain of custody, and it needs to be publicly verifiable. And with the systems that are in play in the United States, it just doesn't happen that way. And this is why I think, Jimmy, that, when we have selections instead of elections, the people's will is never, brought to the forefront. It's always what the donors want because they can simply control who gets in and who gets out.
And here's the leader of the Democrats in the House, Hakeem Jeffries.
Only citizens can vote for the United States Senate. Only citizens can vote for the presidency of the United States. So this extreme MAGA Republican voter suppression bill is not designed to solve any problem on behalf of the American people. It is designed to jam people up and prevent Americans from voting. The extreme MAGA Republican voter suppression.
So what do you say? What do you say to him saying that it's going to jam people up?
Yeah, well, I think he should look up at the overall system of our elections and try to figure out why people got to stay at the voting spots for 6 to 8 hours like they did in UCLA.
Yeah,
and all these other spots.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how you jam people up. You make them stand in line for hours and hours to vote. That's how, and they don't care about that, do they? They didn't care what had happened when it looked like Bernie Sanders was going to win.
So in 2004, I think it was James Baker and Jimmy Carter had a bipartisan convention, and they came out of that convention, this is Republicans and Democrats, saying the area that's most ripe for fraud is the mail-in process. Well, they put this mail-in process on steroids for the 2020 election, and they found an easy way to do what they needed to do, right? I don't want to, well, I can say we're not on YouTube, right? They found a way to fraudulently steal the election, in my personal opinion, from looking at it. And they don't want to get that mechanism removed away from them, because if they can control that mail-in process, and this is what this is about, when you look at the SAFE Act, it's about removing the mechanism in which ballots are just generated at a mass amount. If that's removed from them, I think they're just fearful that they'll lose a lot of elections where they have this in place, because a lot of these states, like Nevada, these laws were made an emergency faction during the COVID. Well, they made them permanent in some of these laws. It's not just mail-in ballots, it's mass mail-in ballots. So it's like everybody on the voters list in Nevada gets a mail-in ballot. So literally there was millions of ballots out there floating, never turned in. You know, they're just out there for anybody who wants to commit fraud, and especially the establishment, to grab a hold of and then make, push an election the way they want. So if they remove this mechanism from them, they're not going to have their way.
I think when again, it was talking with you when you told me how people in Latin America, wherever that is, they don't speak Latin, I'll tell you that. When they were outraged that you didn't have to have a ID, I was like, something's up. And then I saw a guy do a video where he went into black neighborhoods around the United States, and he asked them, is it hard for you to get an ID? And they looked at him like he had two heads. Like, what are you talking about? It's black people. Is it tough for black people? He goes, no, I got an ID. Everybody's got how can you do anything? You can't do anything without an ID. And that's what I was like, that doesn't seem crazy.
Yeah.
And I guess I would challenge the veracity of her numbers, her 30 million, 15 million number. I'd like to challenge that. Invite her on the show.
Yeah. I do think, Jimmy, that, the good thing about this is going to educate the public on how elections are run. Remember, the Article 1 directs the states to control the elections, right? Federal laws only guarantee voting rights, not procedures. And the good thing is of this particular bill, it's getting people's wheels churning and learning the system, how it works. The bad thing is it's not going to fix the problem. My friend in Nevada, Ellen Swenson, she's an election integrity activist. She did some numbers in 2022, and she saw that there were 40,000 illegitimate votes that were cast. Why? Because people who live in Vegas, they move on, they die, they don't live there, but they're still on the voter list. So they were mailing out ballots to people who weren't even living there, who weren't even alive. And literally a lot of your seats in that particular election in 2022, the Secretary of State one, that was decided by 12,000 votes. So you can just imagine, how you can really mess up an election or sway an election when you have mass mail-in ballots. And with ballot harvesting, you or I can take as many ballots as you want and put them in that drop box.
Okay. All right. Well, Craig Pastajardul, I appreciate your insight and expertise on this, and I hope it wakes people up to what the real problem is. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that. All the stuff that they just gave out ballots, the mail-in ballots does seem problematic. I got it. Do you think they'll ever get rid of them?
Well, if they went back to the old rules of mail-in ballots, the old rules, Jimmy, were that every election, if you wanted a mail-in ballot because you couldn't make it to the polls because of an injury or age or sickness, whatever it is, every election you had to re-register for that ballot. Now it's different. In Arizona, in Maricopa County, if you voted in the last 10 years, you're on that list, a ballot's being sent out to you. So they don't clean these lists up at all. And I think in the case of Kerry Lake's election, about 1.8 million ballots were mailed out a month early. Only like 800,000 were turned in. So once again, you got 1 million ballots just floating out there. So it's not just mail-in ballots. It's also the way they create these lists to distribute the ballots. There's no chain of custody when they're mailed in, but there's also no chain of custody from the printing company when they're mailed to you. So there's so many different problems. When you go to Nicaragua, the chain of custody starts at the door. The ballots are there. They're counted in front of the people. So it's almost impossible to cheat and steal that election because it's done in front of the purview of the citizens. With mail-in ballots and mass mail-in ballots in particular, that thing is just obliterated.
And I want to show you, here's a list of all the countries, full or partially democratic countries that require ID to register to vote or cast a ballot on election day in all districts. For Iceland, oh, you know, those racists. Sweden, New Zealand, Denmark, Canada, Ireland, Switzerland, Finland, Australia, Luxembourg, Netherlands, the Nazis over in Germany, Austria, United Kingdom, Malta, Spain, Mauritius, Uruguay, Japan, Italy, Cape Verde. Where is Cape Verde? Sounds like you want to go there for a vacation, right? And eat things that are green. It's in Africa. It must be a nice part of Africa to be called Cape Verde. South Korea, Costa Rica. Look at all. So anyway, Estonia, the Czech Republic, Colombia, Peru, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Montenegro, Ukraine, frickin' Ukraine. Okay, Mali, Fiji, they have the water. Not as nice as you think it is. A lot of problems with the Fiji water. Anyway, so there it is. Kyrgyzstan. Okay. United States, no. Haiti does, but not here. United States, no. Okay. All right, Craig Pasta Jardula, thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me on, Jimmy. I'll see you in Chicago.
See you in Chicago, pal. Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com.